All right, let's dive into something that has honestly puzzled people for thousands of years. Those food laws in the book of Leviticus. You know the ones. Why were some animals clean and others unclean? Was this all just an ancient way to avoid getting food poisoning? Or is there something way deeper going on here? Well, let's get into it. So, the most common theory you'll hear is that these were basically the world's first public health guidelines. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Don't eat pork if you're in the desert and you don't have a fridge. But is that really all there is to it? Or is that just the easy answer? Because when you start to really pull on this thread, you find out it's not so simple. We're looking at what you could call the Levitical food puzzle. It's got way more layers than you'd think. The answer isn't just a straightforward yes or no. And that's where things start to get really, really interesting. Okay, let's get one thing out of the way right up front. Thanks to modern marvels like refrigeration and, our whole system of food safety, we can now safely eat a lot of the foods that were on that original unclean list. So if we're looking at this purely from a 21st century health perspective, nope, these specific laws are not strictly necessary anymore. But, and this is a really big but, that does not mean the laws were just random, superstitious guesses. Actually, when we look at them through the lens of ancient ecology and what they knew back then, a pretty fascinating pattern starts to emerge. It turns out there was some serious practical wisdom at work. So, if it wasn't just about avoiding a stomachache, what was it really about? This is where we have to look past the idea of a simple health code and start exploring the other layers of meaning that were baked right into these ancient instructions. Just take a look at the patterns here. On one side, you have the clean animals. Think cows and sheep that chew their cud, or fish that have fins and scales. These were generally herbivores, and they lived in pretty predictable ways. On the other side, the unclean animals were often scavengers, predators, or bottom feeders that lived in murky waters. So think about it. In a world with no modern medicine, sticking to the safer, more predictable food sources just made a whole lot of sense. It was a system that trained people to value order and to be really discerning about what they were putting into their bodies. So the big takeaway here is that these laws were incredibly smart for their time. They were based on real-world observation, and they absolutely served a protective function. This wasn't about superstition at all. In many ways, it was about survival. But, and this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter, the health benefits, they were basically a positive side effect. They were the tip of the iceberg, not the main point of the whole thing. The real purpose was something much, much deeper. The biggest clue comes from the text of Leviticus itself. It never actually says, follow these rules so you'll be healthy. What it says, over and over, is something like, follow these rules because I am holy. So the goal wasn't physical health, it was about being spiritually distinct. And this idea of holiness, well, it completely reframes the entire conversation, doesn't it? We're not talking about diet plans anymore. We're talking about identity. These laws were a form of spiritual training, a daily exercise in what it meant to be set apart for God. There's actually a great term for this. Covenantal formation. Think of it like a sports team wearing a specific uniform. It's not just about the clothes, right? It's about creating a shared identity, a sense of belonging, a reminder of what team you're on. These food laws were kind of like a uniform for everyday life, constantly reminding the people of Israel who they were and who they belonged to. So how did this actually work in practice? Well, it had this awesome three-part effect. First, it just plain set them apart. I mean, when you eat differently than all your neighbors, it automatically creates a distinct culture. Second, it brought God into the most ordinary, mundane parts of life. Every single meal became a moment to remember their covenant. And third, it was a constant exercise in self-control. It trained them to place God's instructions above their own cravings. And why on earth use food for this kind of training? Because it's absolutely brilliant. Food is something you have to deal with every single day, multiple times a day. You can't ignore it. It's physical, it's habitual, and it's really, really hard to just spiritualize it away. It's the perfect training ground for developing real, tangible discipline. Okay, so right about now, a bunch of you are probably thinking, hold on, but what about the New Testament? Didn't Jesus just declare all foods clean? And that is a fantastic question. To answer it, we have to look really closely at the context of those passages. Because when we really dig in, we see that most of these passages aren't actually about food at all. The debates Jesus was having, they were about man-made traditions that have been piled on top of the original law. That crazy vision Peter had with all the animals, it was a powerful metaphor about welcoming non-Jewish people into the faith.
And when the apostles later gave instructions about food, it was almost always about avoiding foods sacrificed to idols or just being sensitive to the people around you. The focus was always on people, not on menus.
So, what does all this mean for us today? I mean, if these specific laws aren't a requirement for our salvation, and we're definitely not living in ancient Israel, how should we even approach them? Well, the key, it seems, is to shift our whole perspective, from simply following rules to cultivating a heart of reverence.
This chart breaks it down so well. Let's think of it in 3 ways. First, there's our justifying righteousness. That's our fundamental standing with God. What we eat has zero effect on this. It's a gift. But then there's our covenant righteousness. This is about how we walk out our relationship with God. And here, our choices can be a beautiful expression of love and loyalty. And finally, there's our transformational righteousness, our actual growth. And in this area, disciplines like being intentional with our choices can absolutely help us grow.
And this brings us to what might be the most important distinction of all, the huge difference between legalism and reverence. See, legalism is about being trapped by a rule book, and it usually leads to pride in judging others. Reverence is about having a heart of love and respect that freely chooses to honor God.
Here's the easiest way to tell the difference. Legalism always asks, do I have to? What's the bare minimum I can get away with? It's all about finding the loopholes. But a heart of reverence asks a totally different question. What would honor God in this situation? It's not about obligation. It's about devotion.
You know, it's such a common misunderstanding to think that grace is just a free pass to do whatever we want. But that's not it at all. Grace isn't the opposite of a reverent life. Grace is the power source for it. It's the thing that frees us from the trap of rule-keeping so that we can finally live a life of love.
So we end up right back where we started, but with a much better question. The question isn't, do I have to follow these ancient food laws? The much deeper question, the one that really gets to the heart of it for all of us today, is this. What does my response to God's instruction in any area of my life reveal about my reverence for Him? And that is a question worth sitting with.